As I was learning how to tie flies initially, many years ago at this point, I started with books and just looking at step-by-step instructions from books. And this was one of the very first ones that I used a lot. And it's Western trout. I live in the Mountain West and fish Western waters most of the time. And this book by Jack Dennis is well-worn. Used it a lot to learn how to tie flies. This morning we're going to be tying a Caddis Emerger pattern. And this one is a bit of a throwback for me personally. Going through a few videos online yesterday and saw Jack Dennis tying this fly, and Jack Dennis was fishes the West, or I think he still does. So I was able to find this really nice classic video of this particular pattern, and this pattern works great. I'm going to try to tie it just like Jack did in the video. We're going to start out with a piece of antron that's going to be white. This is Z yarn antron, same thing. And what we're going to be doing is tying on what we'll refer to as the shuck. And I want this to be about half of the length of the shank of the hook from eye to bend. So that's where I'm taking my measurement. Then I'm going to pinch that material here and move it to the back. We'll go ahead and take a nice loose wrap here. And as I tighten it, I'm just going to pull it towards myself, directly towards my chest, rather than down, and that will help us keep that from spinning around on the shank of the hook. So then I'm going to check for length, and that's actually looking fine to me. I'm going to take a few more thread wraps back to secure it in place, and then I can just come in here with my scissors. So after I clip that off, I'm going to want to retain the balance of this antron, because we're going to use it as an underwing on this particular fly. So I'm just going to set that aside because I'm going to come right back to it. So next I'm going to tie in a piece of copper wire here. This is just a piece of small copper wire. I'm tying on about either a 16 or 14, and mostly just for the video. I would be fishing this much smaller, down to an 18 or 20 usually. We're going to go ahead and secure that copper, and that copper is more to create some durability and get some of our dubbing under control. The shuck here, what that represents is keeping in mind that this is a bug that has been living its life on the bottom of the water, and now it's coming up to the surface of the water, or emerging. It's going to get up to the surface of the water, and then it's going to fly off in the adult stage and die once it reaches the spinner stage. But it's going from that nymph stage where it's got a skin on it to sloughing off or shedding that skin. And that's what this shuck is representing, is this is that transition phase where it's emerging from the water. That skin is now coming off of the nymph, but it's dragging out a little bit behind the body. And that's what this represents. So when we're talking about the shuck, that's what we're talking about, is that skin kind of shedding off or sloughing off of the nymph form. Or the nymph stage, I should say, of this particular bug. So here I've got, we're going to create a dubbing loop next. Jack actually used one in his video, which was great. I use these from time to time. I've got just a shepherd's hook, kind of a dubbing hook, and I'm just going to put my thread over the top of the shank of the hook here, and then I'm going to let it go around the base of that loop a couple of times. And from there, I'm just going to go ahead and secure that right back where I want that dubbing to start. And you can see my dubbing loop is over here. So it is now broken away and independent from my main tying thread. And I'm just going to move my thread up the hook shank here a little bit. For the dubbing, I'm just going to turn to some Arizona semiseal, and I've got the most of this is more of a dark olive color, but I've also added a little bit of brown to it. What I'm going to want to do is pull these fibers straight up out of my fingers and then replace them in my fingers, and do that multiple times, kind of spreading it out a little bit as I do it. And that's going to create a cloud, a nice cloud of dubbing here that is, for the most part, going vertical, which is what I want it to do. So once I've got that done, I'm going to go ahead and grab my dubbing loop. I'm going to open that up. I'm going to set that dubbing right inside of that dubbing loop, and then I'm going to let that thread kind of close down and cinch around it. So we have something that looks like that. Once I've got that in place, I'm going to begin spinning my dubbing hook. And what you'll see is it's going to start making this really nice dubbing rope that is a little bit natty. It's got, you know, some stuff sticking out of it, and that's a good thing. We want this to be a little natty. We'll clean it up a little bit, but when this emerges out of the water as it's coming up, it's going to have a bubble of air around it. And by having this a little bit natty like that, or a lot of bit natty like this, is it's going to kind of mimic that bubble or that pocket of air that's around this bug as it's coming up to the surface of the water. So it's not the clean kind of abdomen that we're used to. It probably is, but it's got a bubble of air around it. So we've got this really nice and natty abdomen going on here. We will clean it up a little bit, but our copper wire will help us pull some of the stuff into place as well. And I'm just going to hold this dubbing loop straight up from the shank of my hook, and I'm just going to take a wrap or two of thread over the top of it, and one towards the eye. Then I'm going to just come in with my scissors, and I can cut my dubbing loop right off. That's one of the beauties of using a dubbing loop. After you've used them a few times, you'll recognize that it's really not that much additional work. It is more work than finger dubbing for sure, but it's really not that complicated. So now I'm just going to take my copper wire and I'm going to bring it up. Again, I don't know that this is as much for a ribbing effect as it is for just kind of trapping more of these dubbing fibers that are out of control. And also making this a really durable fly by having this copper wire. Then I'm just going to helicopter this, and it'll break right off. So next we're going to turn right back to our antron that we use for the shuck. We're going to make an underwing. I want this underwing to extend right about to the bend of the hook and not too much, not any further or too much further. Give my thread a counterclockwise turn so that thread will jump back towards my fingers. And just like we did with the shuck, we're going to take a loose wrap, pull it fairly tight. You can see it spinning on the hook there a little bit, and that's why we want to be careful. And then I'm going to take a look at it for length, make sure that that's about where I want it. And it is about exactly where I want it. We're going to go ahead and tie that down the rest of the way, grab our scissors, come in and trim that off. So it doesn't hurt to invest in a full skin of a Hungarian partridge. You can pull years worth of feathers off of one skin, and these are some of the most beautiful feathers you're going to find anywhere, and you'll use them for all sorts of flies. I turn to this skin all the time. For the top of the wing, or the overwing, I'm going to use 2 Hungarian partridge feathers that I've taken from the skin of a Hungarian partridge. I've got 2 feathers here, and I'm hoping that this is showing pretty well with a micro on this camera. You notice how the top of this feather here is kind of chewed up. You'll find that when you're taking feathers off the skin, and the better skin you have, probably the fewer of these you have. But I'm always going to check the quality there, and when I've got chunks like that being taken out of the top of it, that's a feather I'm going to set aside and not use. I will be using this one as well as another one that I've taken from the skin. So I've got my partridge feathers, my 2 partridge feathers here, one sitting right on top of the other one. I'm going to get those sitting on top of the shank of the hook and overlapping the bend of the hook just a little bit. I'm going to pinch those in place. We're going to take our thread. We're going to pull that nice and tight to try to keep those from spinning and keep those on the top of the shank of the hook. And that's kind of what we've got going there. So that turned out just about exactly how I wanted them. And then I'm just going to clean up a little bit before we start with our final material. The last material we're going to tie in for the thorax is going to be a couple of peacock herls, and here's you'll take them up near the eye of the peacock feather. I've got a couple of herls here that I've already cut off. I'm going to kind of draw them back. I want to tie them in a way that I don't need to cut them off, so I've just pulled them back right just behind the eye of the hook here. Secure them in place, and then I'm going to take my thread back to where I want that thorax to start. That's where I'm going to start winding my peacock herl up towards the eye of the hook. Don't want to crowd the eye, so I'm going to go ahead and let this finish off a little bit short, about an eye length short of the eye of the hook. And then I'm going to take my 2 peacock herls and I'm going to spin them around a little bit in my fingers. The purpose of that is to try to create a little bit of a rope here. Peacock will have a tendency to want to spread out on you. In fact, you'll probably see that as I'm tying it. As we move it up the shank of the hook, up towards the eye of the hook, you'll see that it's going to start separating those 2 herls, one from the other. We'll go ahead and take a nice good wrap here towards the very back, and this is going to create a really moving, nice looking thorax on this particular pattern, which just finishes it off beautifully. Just a few turns like that. We're going to go ahead and take our thread and tie that off by tying our thread over the top of those 2 herls. Maybe take a wrap or 2 right behind the eye of the hook here. With that, I'm going to just go ahead and turn my hook a little bit sideways so I can get to where I've tied those herls off, and I can come in with my scissors and clip off that excess. From here, I'm just going to go ahead, take a few turns of thread here. This is cleaning up the head a little bit, making sure everything is secure and in place. I grab my whip finisher here from my tool caddy, and we're just going to go ahead and throw in a whip finish. Take the back end of my whip finisher, which also serves as a cutter, and there you've got it. Here is the Caddis Emerger, hopefully tied fairly close in keeping with the way that Jack Dennis tied it.